Bill Denbrough is the brave leader of the Losers Club that fights Pennywise to avenge his brother, Georgie. But in the book, Bill isn't written to be as much of a good person as he is in the movies. Stick around to the end of this video to find out why. It, the ancient evil that terrorized Derry, Maine, singled out one individual opponent above all others, and that was Bill Denbrough. Bill was the leader of the Losers Club, a name given to the group of 12-year-olds who decided to take on it by the town bully, Henry Bowers. My name is Andy Muschietti, and today on Horror History we'll be covering the main protagonist of It and his short-lived little brother, Georgie. Despite his speech-crippling stutter, Bill was probably the bravest character in the book, but he wasn't always that way. To understand how Bill came to be, let's take a look back to the birth of Big Bill. In 1946, Derry hydroelectric worker Zach Denbrough and classical pianist Sharon Denbrough gave birth to their first son, William, who would eventually go by a nickname, Bill. At a young age, Bill was in a minor car accident, which his mother believed to be the cause of his stutter, but it's unclear if that's actually true. Bill had a very close relationship with his parents when he was young, and that bond was only strengthened when Zach and Sharon gave birth to their second son, George, in 1951. Though they did not always get along, Bill cared deeply for George, and George loved and looked up to his older brother. In October of 1957, when Georgie was 6, Bill was sick in bed and used this free time to make a papercraft boat for his brother to play with in the rain. Georgie was thrilled that his brother would do this for him and took special care not to lose the boat. So when the current swept it away to the intersection of Witcham and Jackson Street, Georgie took after it. The boat fell into a storm drain, and Georgie was disappointed to lose the boat that his brother had worked so hard to make for him. Then he heard a voice inside of the drain and saw a man in clown makeup standing there. The man introduced himself as Pennywise and tried to get Georgie to come down in the sewers with him by offering balloons, cotton candy, and rides. Georgie said he has to go, but when Pennywise showed him the boat, he decided to stay for a little bit longer. "When you're down here with me, you'll float too," the clown told Georgie as he reached for it, and Pennywise ripped off his arm, ending the boy's life prematurely at age 6. This event had a huge effect on Bill for the rest of his life, and this feeling stuck with him even after he had forgotten how his brother had died. In December of that same year, Bill snuck into Georgie's room to look at his photo album, and he thought he saw something move in one of the photos, but still wasn't quite sure if it was his imagination. Georgie's death had a negative effect on Bill's relationship with his parents. His mother gave up playing the piano after Georgie's funeral, and the void he sat in between his parents when they all sat on the couch together felt longer and colder without Georgie also there next to him. One day, his parents got into a fight when his father tried to remove the toys out of Georgie's room, and they both ended up sobbing in separate rooms, paying no attention to how this was affecting Bill. One could come to the conclusion that because of this awkward home life, Bill started spending more time out of the house, and he became pretty good friends with an asthmatic kid named Eddie Kasprak. One day, 8 months after his brother's funeral, Bill and Eddie were playing in the Barrens when 3 bullies, Victor Chris, Belch Huggins, and Henry Bowers, came running up to the embankment and asked if they had seen a fat boy anywhere. The boys destroyed the dam that Bill and Eddie had been building and beat up Eddie, giving him a bloody nose and an asthma attack. After the bullies left, Bill meets the boy that they were looking for, Ben Hanscom, and asks if he'll stay with Eddie while he tries to go get his medicine. He grabs his bike, Silver, who he's named after the horse from the Lone Ranger, and when he rides Silver, he becomes like a new person, which resembles his adult self. He rides fast, but with reckless abandon, and I think without the power that Silver holds, he would likely have been struck dead in traffic. Bill's stutter is so bad that he must write the request to the pharmacist on a piece of paper in order to get Eddie's aspirator. When he gets back, they're amazed at how quickly he made the run, and Bill and Eddie become friends with Ben, bonding over their beatings at the hands of Henry Bowers. That day, Bill decided to take another look at Georgie's photo album. He's been starting to have visions of Georgie as a monster, which I think are a result of it trying to rattle Bill, hoping it could be a future target. Bill flips to Georgie's school photo and it winks at him, causing him to drop the book, and blood drips out of the pages, though Bill's parents would not be able to see the blood. The next day, Bill helps construct the dam at the stream in the Barrens and introduces Richie Tozier and Stan Uris to Ben. As they all relax by the stream bank, Bill tells the group that he needs to tell them something serious, and tells the story about the photo album. This is part of what makes him the leader of the group. I mean, they've all seen the influence of Pennywise, but none of them are brave enough to acknowledge it and talk about it, because that makes it real. None of them besides Bill, who musters up the bravery because he's sick of tiptoeing around the subject of his brother's killer. Bill doesn't know it's related to Pennywise or the murders at this point though, and he thinks it has something to do with Georgie's ghost. They're interrupted by Mr. Nell, the Irish cop, who tells them that their dam is disrupting the drainage system in Derry. Bill tries to take the blame, but each one of them shares part of the blame. This is is an indicator of Bill's selflessness, which comes into play for him later on. Bill and Richie walk home together, and Richie asks if he can see the photo album. Bill originally says no, but after a heartfelt conversation with Richie, he agrees. A small hint about the power that the Losers Club can gain when they are united. When they go into Georgie's room, Richie is able to see the bloodstained pages. Georgie's photo is missing. Instead, there's a picture of downtown Derry from the olden days. A pair of sailors walk down the street, and they have Richie and Bill's faces. The picture begins to move, and they turn towards the canal, where a clown pops up from over the edge like a jack-in-the-box, but with Georgie's face. He reaches towards the sailor Bill, and the real Bill reaches his hand into the photo before Richie yanks his arm out, and Bill's hand is bleeding. I'd interpret this as a warning sign from it to Bill. He wants Bill to draw that association between the murder of his brother and what he perceives as the monster, because that's gonna make Bill more afraid than he was before, and Pennywise feeds off of fear. However, Bill doesn't shy away from the challenge as it expects. Early on in the summer, Bill is not able to join the others in seeing I Was a Teenage Werewolf at the movie theater because he's busy taking a speech therapy test in Bangor. His mother would continually urge him to repeat the phrase. He thrusts his fist against the post, but still insists he sees the ghost. This is something that theater performers commonly use to warm up, and it's supposed to help Bill overcome his stutter. But he's also able to use it to overcome other things, such as fear, doubts, or evil. So Bill misses the werewolf movie, but he does get to experience the werewolf anyway, when he and Richie go to investigate the abandoned house at 29 Neibolt Street. Bill brings with a pistol that he stole from his father, but it isn't that effective against it, which uses the werewolf form and wears a Derry high school jacket. Bill accuses it of killing his brother, to which it responds, "I'll kill you too." It ends up chasing them down the streets, and they try to escape on Silver, but it, now in the form of the clown but still wearing the Derry high school jacket, continues to gain ground on them until they get near a busy street and it disappears. The event is traumatizing for Bill, but it does give him a clue he needs to help take the fight directly to Pennywise. After the altercation at 29 Neibolt, Bill and Richie looked back as they were escaping on Silver to discover that Pennywise had just disappeared next to a storm drain. I think Bill was probably the only one who could have put this together, along with the location where his brother Georgie was found, to determine that it is somehow connected to the sewers. He asks his father, who works for Derry Hydroelectric, and he explains that the pipes are mostly empty except for during the spring floods. He also tells them to stay out of the sewers, warning him that he could easily get lost in there. Bill does some research of his own, and on July 3rd, after getting together with the losers at the Barrens, he explains his findings, that several other cultures seem to have different versions of it. The Irish have a creature known as a glamour. The Plains Indians have the Manitau, the Himalayans have the Talus, even though I thought that was only in Breath of the Wild, Central Europe has the Alak, and the French have the Lupe-Garu. He explains that the Himalayans use something called the Ritual of Chud to defeat their talus. They would overlap tongues and then bite in so they're stapled eye to eye. They must then tell jokes and riddles back and forth, and the first to laugh loses.
The rule is simple. You laugh, you die.
Actually, Felix is kind of right, and I think I just died. If the human loses, he dies, but if the talus loses, he must go away for 100 years. So at this point, Bill started gathering up TikTok videos to show to Pennywise during the ritual. Okay, I think I died again. On July 3rd, the losers get together and shoot off some firecrackers, but Bill tells them to put him away because he senses something is going to happen. I think this is Bill using the shine, which is the psychic clairvoyance that comes up in a lot of Stephen King novels, most prominently Danny Torrance from The Shining. I think they all probably shine a little bit, but Bill's is the strongest, and this actually kind of ties into the reason that he has to be the one to perform the Ritual of Chud. He tells his friends to create a stash of rocks because he feels like Bowers and the bullies are going to attack, and what ensues becomes known as the Apocalyptic rock fight. Bill plays a big role in it by not flinching away from the notorious fastball pitcher Victor Criss and hitting him with a rock that causes him to run from the fight. The losers talk more about how Pennywise could be defeated as they build their new clubhouse in the Barrens that July, where Bill develops a theory that they can kill the monster using a silver bullet. It's something that works in the movies, and as kids, they all believe that it actually works, and they go to the library to research more methods. Bill also contributed to the completion of the clubhouse by secretly borrowing some of his father's tools from the garage. After completing it, Mike Hanlon brings his father's old photo book to show them how Pennywise is scattered throughout Derry's history, and one of the pages comes to life, and Pennywise rushes them and hangs on a lamppost in the foreground, threatening to kill them all.
kill you all.
Everyone is trauma-stricken by the encounter. Stan is so deeply affected that he goes into denial about it even happening. But if you analyze Bill's reaction, it's different than everyone else. Sure, he's shaken up by what happened, but he also feels that It is scared of them. On July 17th, the losers are seeking advice on how to fight It, and they decide to perform this Indian smoke hole ritual in their clubhouse. The idea was that they'd breathe in the smoke and have visions that would help them. I think the homeless population in LA has a similar strategy, and I don't think it works. As they're trying to decide who's gonna be the one to do it, Bill shows his leadership and protectiveness of Beverly by arguing that it shouldn't be her because she's a girl. They all pick out a match, and whoever gets the burned one is supposed to stay up top and pull him to safety if anyone passes out. However, they all pull matches and none of them are burned anymore. So they take the hints that they should all go into the smoke hole. Bill stays in as long as he can and sees the inside of the tiny clubhouse start to expand to the size of a ballroom, but eventually he can't take it anymore and he's the fifth one to jump out. Bill was definitely the biggest threat to It, but it just goes to show that he wasn't strong enough without the shared power of his friends. On July 20th, after Eddie's arm got broken by Henry Bowers, Bill gathers up the gang to go visit him in the hospital, where Eddie's overprotective mother ambushes them and tells them off. They wait out that night to try again, in the meantime developing the plan to melt down some silver dollars to use as ammo for Bill's slingshots. From what I understand, silver dollars were much bigger back then than they are now, so it actually could have been effective. However, Bill himself wasn't such a great shot with the slingshot.
You're in the lead right now with a pathetic 3 out of 10.
Richie, will you please shut up?
So it's decided that Beverly will be the one to handle it. It was midway through the summer, no, not that midsummer, when Beverly approached the others in a panic after seeing It take out one of the bullies, Patrick Hockstetter. They go to investigate the spot in the junkyard where Beverly saw it happen and find a threat from Pennywise written in blood. Maybe he had just had enough of being the victim, or maybe his mind connected the sight of Patrick's blood with his own brother's, but this is where Bill snapped and screamed out, "We're gonna kill you!" He asks his friends desperately for their help, and they all join together in a hug in the rain. 3 days later, everyone goes to Bill's place so they can make the silver slugs. And although Ben was the one to actually physically make them, Bill used his creativity to help them get away with it without his parents finding out, by setting up a Monopoly board to make it look like they were in the middle of a game, which they could rush inside to sit around when his parents came home. 2 days later, they arrived at 29 Neibolt Street for the first time since Bill and Richie's werewolf encounter earlier that summer. Bill's bravery and determination to avenge his brother caused him to lead them in crawling under the porch, where they could climb in through a basement window. It started to play tricks on them as they made their way through one corridor. The hallway elongated. The eyes of the elves on the wallpaper started to bleed, and the ceiling closed in on them, causing everyone to freak out. Perhaps it was Bill's strong shine that allowed him to stay calm and realize what they were seeing isn't real. He punches up to where the ceiling appeared to be, and when he did so, they could all see that what they were seeing was not true, and this fixes the room. The others perceive Bill's strength to be a result of his love for his brother, but he reminds them that they all have their own quirks that help them fight back against its manipulations. Eventually, they make it to a door, and Big Bill is the first to approach it. He hears pumping machinery coming from the other side, just like the sound of the pumping stations, or as they call them, Morlock holes in the Barrens. I think Bill, with his knowledge of the Derry hydroelectric system acquired from his father, was the first to realize what was behind this door. This was where it came from. Behind the door was a dilapidated bathroom, but this was no Saw movie. This was where It connected to the world on the surface. They were attacked by It, once again in the werewolf form. Beverly missed her first shot, and It sprang at Bill, knowing he was the leader and seeing the chance to demoralize the group. Ben steps in front, and It ends up slashing Ben before Beverly hits it on her third and final shot, causing it to scream death threats at them as it retreated into the sewers. Beverly's blouse is damaged, and Bill offers her his shirt to cover up, once again showing the seedlings of their attraction and Bill's protective nature, which we would see more of when everything went down a couple weeks later. On a mysteriously quiet day in August, Richie, Eddie, and Stan run into Bill with his bike in the middle of town. Mike later shows up too when all of a sudden Ben and Beverly are running up to them, telling of how Henry Bowers had snapped and chased Beverly, and they were now skulking about in the Barrens. Bill makes the decision for the group. They're going to reclaim their play spot. It was at this remark that Eddie started to think that Henry wasn't the only one who was losing it. Bill was drifting towards madness as well. If we analyze his character up to this point, he's driven by the desire for revenge for his brother's death, crippled by grief for his friends and classmates, and shaped by all the adult situations he's already had to face at age 12. He's even subconsciously ridden his bike in a dangerous way through busy streets, a very subtle beginning of suicidal tendencies. So it's likely that Eddie was right, and Bill was starting to lose his sanity a little bit that summer. But unlike Henry Bowers, Bill was able to get a grip on it, and actually use it to his advantage to write horror novels as an adult. They go into the Barrens and get attacked by rocks thrown by Victor and Belch. At this point, Bill realizes that it is the biggest source of what's wrong with Derry, and asks Ben to lead them to the pumping station that connects to the sewers. Eddie's arm is broken, so Bill carries him on his back down the ladder. They shake Henry Bowers and go into the inflow pipe underground, an image that would stick with Bill through the years and end up in one of his horror novels, The Black Rapids. They venture into the dark in a line, keeping one hand on the shoulder of the person in front of them to stay together, and unknowingly following the path of the paper boats that Bill made for Georgie almost a year ago now. They come across a small door leading to the lair of it. Bill is unable to see its true form and interprets it as a giant spider. Bill is the one to cross the room towards the spider. It tells him that it is eternal, an eater of worlds. Bill is heaved across the chamber into this blackness, the cosmos of the universe. He faced off against it on something described as the ballroom floor of eternity. He was thrust by it deep into the macroverse, and although Georgie's physical form had long since deceased, he could feel his brother had a place in the macroverse. Bill was caught by another celestial force called the Turtle, who didn't want to engage in the dispute, but did give Bill the advice he needed, by telling him to thrust his fists against the posts and still insist he sees the ghost, the speech therapy technique that Bill could often be heard using. The ritual of Chud doesn't happen in the movie, but there is a little reference to it with this line.
Against the post, and still insists he sees the ghost. He thrusts his fist against the post.
As the human voice of it fades out, the alien language of the Deadlights, the true form of it, fades in. Bill establishes a mental connection by biting into its metaphysical tongue and using the teeth of his mind, and begins the ritual of Chud. Although Bill shouldn't have been able to stand a chance, it was his belief in all of the childish things he believes in, like the silver bullets, the power of the bike, and the phrase he thrusts his fist against the post and still insists he sees the ghost, that helped him overcome it, causing it to scream and beg for Bill to let it go. They return to the real world, where it retreats further into the chamber. The losers decide that it sounded like it was dying, but Bill was unsure what to think. They try to flee before the pipes fill up with rainwater and drown them, but get lost on the way out. And Bill remembers his father warning him to never play in the sewers because he could easily get lost. But eventually they do make their way out of the sewers, where the sky is starting to clear up. This would be the last time all 7 of them were ever together in the same place at the same time again, and the leader of the Losers Club would make one more request that would forever change the course of their lives. He asked them the promise that if it were to ever come back, no matter where they were, they would return and try to kill it again. They make a blood pact before breaking off one by one and returning home. When Bill leaves, he thinks he never wants to play in the Barrens again. Just like when Bill would ride on Silver, defeating it opened those gates towards adulthood. Over the next year, Bill would lose his stutter, and it was gone by the age of 13. One by one, the group moved out of Derry. Bill attended a college in Maine to study literature, listing influences like Edgar Allan Poe, H.P. Lovecraft, and Richard Matheson. He's a C student, occasionally able to earn a B. One day, he calls out his pretentious instructor in front of the class. Why does a story have to be socio-anything? Politics, culture, history, aren't those natural ingredients of any story if it's told well? I mean, can't you guys just let a story be a story? You know what, Bill? Yes. But I'm still not going to delete my channel. The instructor has a much ruder reaction though, humiliating him in front of the class and suggesting that he has a great deal to learn. That week, Bill writes a story called The Dark, about a small boy who kills the monster lurking in his cellar. I'm not sure if he realizes he's told his own story about defeating the monster under Derry and downscaled it to a single house level, because at this point, some of his memories about Derry, Georgie, and it have already started to fade. The teacher gives him an F and calls it pulp crap, so Bill decides to send it to a magazine where it receives praise. He sends his feedback to his instructor alongside his drop card. Then, during his senior year, he writes a novel and gets it published. finished. At the age of 23, he's already a successful writer. He starts dating his agent, Susan Brown, and works on a second novel called The Black Rapids, which he sells the movie rights to and has the option to do the first draft of the screenplay, after which he's invited out to Hollywood for further rewrites. Susan begs him not to go, but he ends up leaving Maine for the West Coast. An actress named Audra Phillips is cast in the movie, and Bill ends up marrying her. He would go on to write more novels. Based on the titles of his books, I think they're all a result of the horrifying experiences that he had as a child. The Dark and the Black Rapids could be about the journey through the sewers. The Glowing refers to the Deadlights, the true form of it, though that one could also be a parody of The Shining. There's also a werewolf novel whose title is not mentioned, which could come from the werewolf form of it that they battled. He also has an original screenplay called Attic Room, possibly about the encounter he had at 29 Neibolt Street with the others. Bill's life is going great. He's successful, he's married to a superstar, and he's long forgotten about the traumatic childhood he had in Derry. All is well until 1985, when his old buddy Mike Hanlon calls him up on the phone while Bill is shooting a movie in England with some horrible news. It has returned. After Mike fills Bill in on everything, remnants of his childhood re-emerge in the 39-year-old Bill Denbrough. His stutter comes back. Scars appear on his hands where the blood pact was made, and he remembers for the first time in years how his little brother Georgie truly died, but not all of the memories come back right away. He abandons the production to board a plane to the US, and suddenly it seems apparent that all the inspiration for all of his horror novels was Derry. On the cab ride over from his hotel to the restaurant that they're all meeting at, Bill's apologetically foul-mouthed cabbie, who by the way is probably my favorite character in the book and deserves his own episode of horror history, points out how Derry has become more of a small city over the years. By this point, everyone already knows about how Stan offed himself, but when he enters the room with the 5 remaining Losers Club members, Bill feels that there's a 6th somehow. Perhaps a clue that despite losing most of his memories about his childhood, he seems to have retained a little bit of his shine. And no, I'm not talking about his now bald head. Mike starts explaining about the murders that caused him to believe that it was back, and when he tells about the death of Adrian Mellon, Bill is the only one to realize that the one who pulled up his body, Harold Gardner, was the son of Dave Gardner, the man who found Georgie. Mike also tells of another death where police found a photograph of Georgie, which is found near the body, and Bill realizes that it's the same photo that disappeared from the album when he was a kid. At the end of the meal, Bill gets a bad feeling about the fortune cookies, which I found similar to the bad feeling he got before the rock fight in 1958. The contents of each of their cookies is specific to their fears. Bill doesn't open his, but he can tell that it's a mutant fly, like from the George Langland story, The Fly, which scared Bill a lot. Do we have a clip of the movie? Mike has them walk the town and try to regain some of their old memories, and Bill meets a kid with a skateboard who tells him that he heard changing voices coming from one of the pipes near a pumping station, and warns him to stay away. The kid seems surprised that Bill is privy to the thing that haunts Derry. I think Bill and his friends are unlike other adults in town because they made the promise in 1958. Bill asks to try out the kid's skateboard, but at the last second decides not to. And the scene is symbolic of how Bill no longer has the childlike energy that got him through the encounter with it the first time. He continues walking, and then asks a little girl what her favorite store in Derry is, and she tells him it's secondhand rose, secondhand clothes. He goes over and sees his old bike, Silver, in the window, and for the first time in a long time, he thinks about the phrase. He thrusts his fist against the posts and still insists he sees the ghosts. After buying the bike, he gets permission to store it at Mike's house, and together they fix up the bike, adding childish I sound like f***ing Bill right now. They fix up the bike, adding childish frills like playing cards. Mike opens up a new pack of cards, and it contains 2 ace of spades, one with a blue back and the other red, as if this was a mixed deck. I think this represents the elements of Bill's childhood starting to manifest themselves in the adult Bill, similar to how his stutter and his old scars came back. That night, after catching up with everyone some more over some drinks at the library and having another scary encounter with It, who uses the form of Stan Uris's head to threaten the Losers Club, they call it a night, starting to feel better about their chances after recovering more of their lost memories. Before leaving, Beverly starts screaming about their hands, and they realize that all of their hands are bleeding from the scars where they made the promise. They all hold hands as crazy supernatural occurrences rock the library, and Bill gets the feeling that this would be the last time all 6 of them were together, just like the promise they made in 1958 was the last time that the 7 of them were together. After this happens, Beverly claims that she now remembers everything that happened in the original battle with It, and Bill is dismally aware that he's falling in love with Bev. The two decide to walk back to the hotel together. Beverly asks for a kiss, and Bill becomes aware of how much she looks like Audra and kisses her. I can give Bev a pass because she just left an abusive husband, but pretty uncool on Bill's part. They end up going back to Bill's room, and they go all the way. Obviously, this is a pretty crappy thing to do on Bill's part, but in terms of what it means for his character, he's realizing that the woman that he married is very much like one of his first attractions when he was younger. Okay, that sounds weird to say. What I'm trying to say is that Bill realizes that he never actually lost the youthful energy and the mindset that helps him defeat it, just like how his creative mind was a big part of his childhood and he became a writer to continue channeling that energy even after he had forgotten about Derry. Bill gets a call from Eddie's room in the middle of the night and shows up to find his arm broken once again and Henry Bowers dead in the hotel room. They realize it must have broken out Henry and decide that they can't wait until tomorrow. They have to kill it tonight, before one of them gets killed. They call over to the library to tell Mike, but the police chief picks up. They were too late. Henry had put Mike in the hospital. The remaining 5 of them pile into Eddie's limo, and it taunts Bill over the car radio. Each one of them had fears as children, and each of them have new fears as adults, but Bill's fear has stayed constant. He fears losing someone that he loves ever since he lost his brother Georgie. It uses Georgie's voice, screaming things like, "You let it kill me," to rattle Bill. This wouldn't be the only thing that it did to expose Bill's fear though. When they arrive at the manhole, Bill finds a familiar object. It's his wife Audra's purse. She had come after him against his warnings, and it had abducted her, knowing that Bill couldn't handle losing another loved one. I mean, I would say that he shouldn't have cheated on her if that was the case, but I'm not supposed to have an opinion. Bill once again has to carry the crippled Eddie down the ladder, just as they did his children. The sewer systems have changed over the years, but the old unused pipes are still in place, and the 5 members of the Losers Club make their way back to the lair of it. But there would be one more challenge for Bill before they get there. There were instances back in 1958 where it threatened Bill with one of his worst fears, claiming it would take the form of Georgie in order to drive Bill insane. However, unlike the movie, it saves this trump card for the sewers in 1985. Bill held up the match he was using to light the way and saw Georgie approaching him in his yellow rain jacket, crying and looking for his boat. When Georgie cried, a strange garble of sounds was heard. But Bill was too heartbroken to notice that something was off. Bill felt that he deserved to die. All the others can do is encourage Bill to realize that it's not really Georgie and fight it. Bill's stutter is hampering not only his speech but his rationality, but he's finally able to successfully recite the line.
He thrusts his fists against the posts and still insists he sees the ghosts.
To overcome both his stutter and it, which retreats back into the inner lair. There was only one thing left to do now: the final confrontation with it. As Bill, Ben, Eddie, Richie, and Beverly get into the spider's chamber, they realize that they no longer needed the matches, as there's something emanating from it: the deadlights. The nightmare spider descends from above, and Bill finds Audra strung up in the webbing.
They float.
Bill confronts the spider and finds himself being flung out of his physical body and back into the void. It tells him that the turtle who helped him in 1958 died a few years ago and won't be of any use this time. It threw him again, and Bill tried to mentally seize its tongue and engage in the ritual of chud, but this time he misses his grip. Back in the actual physical chamber, Richie notices Bill's face contorting. His spirit is in another realm, so Richie runs up to the spider and tries to distract it, but he gets whacked into the macroverse. Richie is able to engage in the ritual. He takes Bill's hand and holds tightly onto it, which returns to the real world, and they get back to their physical bodies. When they arrive, they find that the spider has already maimed Eddie, and he's dying. But this time they can't let it get away, and they follow it into the deepest part of the chamber. The deadlight is leaking out of it now, and it begs them to let it go, offering the chance to live 500 years. But Bill, with his childlike innocence, only wants to see his brother's killer brought to justice. It's only fitting that over 27 years later, Bill is the one to punch his way into the spider's chest and crush the heart with his bare hand. After helping Richie back to the others, Bill finds his wife and discovers that she still has a pulse, but she's become catatonic. Eddie is dead, and without him, they have a much harder time navigating their way out. Bill is the only one to eventually realize that there's light coming in through small holes on the top of the pipe. The street above them had collapsed in an epic flood that took place while they were fighting it, and they're able to pull themselves back up onto Main Street. Beverly tells Bill that she hopes Audra's gonna be alright, and they share one last hug, which is photographed by a reporter documenting the damage and appears in the newspaper with the caption, "Survivors." Audra is taken away in an ambulance, and Bill runs into the skateboard kid from before and tells him it's alright now. At first, this seems like an insignificant interaction, but I can only imagine how good this felt for Bill, after being driven to destroy the monster under Derry for so long because of what happened to his brother, to let this new generation know that they don't have to be afraid anymore. But with It's dead, the remaining Losers Club's memories started to fade once more, this time much faster than before. Within a few days, Bill was unable to remember Stan's last name or Eddie's health condition. Bill had one last thing to take care of. Audra was released from the hospital before Mike. She was able to eat solid foods now, but she was still catatonic. So Mike let them stay at his house to try to rehab, but she wasn't making much progress, and Bill began to fear that his wife would be a vegetable forever. He had one more idea to try to save her, something that had saved him, something that had saved Eddie and Richie too. His old bike, Silver. Decked out with all of his childhood fanfare like the playing cards, the basket, and the horn, he sat Audra in the carrier and did what he had always done. Rode fast and recklessly downhill into a busy street, picking up speed instead of braking. And just like his belief in everything from his childhood saved him once before against it, Audra comes to and holds on to Bill, whose stutter has completely disappeared, and they embrace. Bill was the centerpiece of the Losers Club that finally defeated the scourge of Derry, Maine, laying it to rest. His bravery and leadership shined through even the bleakest of scenarios, and he was driven all along by his love for those close to him. His wife Audra, before that his best friends, Eddie, Richie, Stan, Beverly, and Mike, and through everything, his little brother, Georgie. So that's the entire known history of Bill Denbrough. Your homework is to let me know in the comments who I should analyze next on horror history, and click the playlist on the left for my lessons on other characters. Remember to subscribe to CZsWorld for new horrors every week, ring that death bell for notifications, and I'll see you in the next one. Assuming we both survive.